Today is Friday, October 24th, 2014, and my name is Louise Stern, and it's my honor and privilege today to interview Dahlia, otherwise known as Pobie Johnston. And I'm doing this for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County, and we're just very, very happy, Pobie, to have you here. Good afternoon. And maybe you'll tell us briefly about your family. Where were you born? When, if you want to tell us that. And what your parents' occupation was, and the siblings that you may have had.
Thank you. It's really a privilege to be asked to participate. My family, my mother and father were both immigrants. My mother was born in Romania. My father was born in Poland. I don't remember where. They came here as children, came to without parents, to either family members but they came very young, and really never spoke very much about it, because I think the first thing they wanted to do was become Americans, go to school, even as soon as they could, to get a job, go to night school, so that for whatever their reasons were, it was not any real conversations about where they came from, except that they had my mother's parents had died. They were with a grandmother, and they came here. My mother's two sisters also came, but they ended up in California. And we were in Philadelphia for the most part. As I say, I don't know where my parents met, although they somehow had been in California, because my oldest brother was born in California. But they came back to the East Coast. They preferred the weather here. And I guess they got tired of picking oranges or something. Yeah, I guess when you have to work and it's hot, it's different from being in some city. But I was born in Philadelphia, and the Woman's Homeopathic Hospital. Philadelphia has a lot of really interesting hospitals. I credit the Homeopathic Hospital for my good food habits for some reason, and not taking medication. But my mother, the things that I can start remembering, I was in Philadelphia. We lived in what was really Little Italy, so everybody was Italian. Very few, and I don't remember Jews being in the neighborhood. My mother and father had a small tailoring shop. My mother did the tailoring, whatever you need on a sewing machine, and my father, I could see the big pressing machine, but he must have been out just looking for work, because he had a little old truck of some kind. And there was a black man, Mr. Brown, who did the pressing. So from an early age, that was the makeup of those of us that occupied this very limited space that we rented from an Italian family. And
did you live there? Did you live in the same space?
Yeah, this was really, well, no, we lived in two different ones on Passyunk Avenue. But I can remember that the Italian section there, because that was the day when the people who sold things had push carts up and down the streets. So that I can remember my mother giving me a nickel and say, go up to the Italian lady and buy greens, which would be all washed and cleaned and mixed, that they're gorgeous, and it was like 5 cents worth in a bag, and brought them home to Mom. And actually those years until, that was 1921 when I was born, but the things I could remember, I think, started at the first place we lived on Passyunk Avenue, and then Father moved the business up the street a little bit, because I could remember a big public thing about somebody named Fatty Arbuckle. Well, now we know that he had a sort of a vivid history, and I think that would have been about 1925 that I might have remembered that. I remember the little yard we had with, where we played in the back while everybody was working. But when we moved up the street a little further, I started school from that location, the John Hay School. But that's where we were when the Depression started and the crash of October of 1929, which
And you
really
remember
almost
that.
turned everything upside down, because as poor as everybody were, and the bread lines, and the people who would stand in line across the street that we could see, there was a little foundry there, and men would just stay there until, if they needed 2 people, until they bid their wages down, who would work for less than $1.75, and then whoever was last at maybe 50 cents an hour, they picked those 2 people. The others had been discharged. So if anything, maybe it was a predecessor to the life I think I live now. It was that exposure to what made America, which these people who would work, I mean, most of the Italians and the people there, they were, when anybody tells me they know who was legal and who wasn't legal, the word WAPS, without papers, is started with that.
That's
Yes,
I didn't
and
know that.
because they came over here to dig the subways of Philadelphia. I mean, crappy work down in it. So that, I mean, it didn't take much to pick up from my parents, and my father was really, one of his other things was active in labor, the development of labor unions. I mean, that's way back when not too many people were doing that kind of thing. So the things I think I picked up about how you feel about other people, how you look at immigrants, to me that was the strength and the foundation of this country. So, and I know on weekends, my parents would walk us, didn't use money for a streetcar, to go to Independence Hall, and Carpenter's Hall. If it was historic and it was free, we were there on a Sunday.
Pobie, did you have brothers and sisters?
I had 3 brothers, none of whom are alive. Actually, there's nobody else alive that I know of in our family now. My youngest brother, if I start from that, at age 10, died of undiagnosed diabetes type 1, which they really didn't. In fact, he got sick one day, didn't want to go to school. And we all loved to go to school. I mean, my mother kept saying, "You're living in a great country. Not only you can go to school, you have to go to school." And libraries. I mean, we knew the street to the public library. So, and reading was the other thing. But it was undiagnosed because who had money to go to the doctor when you got sick?
Right.
And it was this time of the year. Actually, it was he died on October 29th. It was I was babysitting someplace at that time, and they put him in isolation because they couldn't identify why he was in a coma, but he died during the night. So my mother
That's
had
a
a tough
tragedy.
time. But the good things about stuff like that is when the Depression happened, and I can tell you nobody needed a cleaner when they didn't have a job. So the father's sister and her husband lived in suburban Philadelphia. So I mean, the good news was it was like moving out of the Lower East Side and coming to Greenwich. And he was in business with the uncle and aunt, but we had to squeeze into their limited quarters, and eventually my father and mother did, I don't remember what, well, you know, when Roosevelt, when we started the WPA, I know my mother worked for a part of whatever the public works was, and went to a farmer's, to a farm where she helped the farm because they couldn't hire hired hands to save the crops. So she helped the lady. I think they canned applesauce, peaches, string beans. I don't know, anything to keep the food.
Right.
And my father had started a little business of delivering. He would drive into Philadelphia and to some Jewish bakery, I don't know where it was in Philadelphia, and picked up things and delivered them somewhere in the suburbs of where we lived near Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. And there must have been some sort of a group of Jewish farms or something, but I remember he delivered bread to them. He delivered a root. So the good side of that was I went to great schools.
Oh.
I mean, that was the best thing that happened because the schools were superior. It would be, again, like landing in Greenwich, where you went to the best
and
schools.
You took great advantage of that, I know.
Oh my gosh, for us it was like, hey, we'd cry if we couldn't go to school one day, because the communicable diseases, that were treated, your home was quarantined, and none of the kids could go to school.
Right.
Everybody sat around crying. So, I mean, I never really felt deprived, but then you didn't have television, you didn't have radio, you just looked at everybody else and
It was a full life.
Yeah, it was, hey,
Right.
go to school, good teachers, a lot of books to read, and you didn't really, where if you found a penny on the street, everybody would follow you to the penny candy store, and we'd buy those strips of sugar dots, different colors, and you'd tear it apart, and everybody got two
Those.
following you.
Right. So how did you happen to get into the military? How did you
to
happen
get into
to
the
serve?
military? Well, I graduated from high school in 1939. My older brother graduated in 1935 from the same high school, very good high school. And he started to work at a hospital nearby after school in the labs. And he was a math and science brain. So when I got to, and I graduated in 1939, but you knew what was happening in Europe. Everybody, all the immigrants knew what was going on in Europe in terms they all had people still there, whether it was Italians or anybody. And in fact, my mother took in a young girl whose family sent her, the Jewish family sent her to the United States, and somebody asked my mother if she could take her in. It meant somebody else shared a bed, but we took care of Ruthie for that time. And but after I got out of high school, my mother had said, because I worked all the time, I always had something to do, and she had she had been not too well. She had anemia, severe anemia, and since my brother was out of school and he had a job, my older brother, she said to me, if you want, some gal in the neighborhood was going to drive to California, and she was looking for somebody. Her mother had a dress shop to drive with her, so my mother said, well, okay, because her two sisters were there. So I was in California when the Japanese attacked. But as soon as that happened, I had a 17, and the other brother, younger brother, was graduated in 1941. He had just graduated. He was not even 18. And he had already gone down to a list, and my mother had a sign for him, because you could get in at 18. And so I decided to come back, because my mother went back to work at Sharp and Dome. She had worked there in World War I, pharmaceutical company. So I got a job in actually it was a plant that made old metal desks and file cabinets, metal. And it was converted to making the sides of airplanes when Roosevelt was sort of a little bit preparing us for what might happen. But when I came, so I worked in that plant. When I came back because the Japanese attacked, and my mother was alone. So I did that, and then in May of '42, May 14th or 15th, Congress passed an act that said they would take women in as an auxiliary. So I didn't the next day off I had from my war job, I went down to Philadelphia to try to enlist, but I was not quite 21. They wouldn't take you in before that, and parents couldn't sign. So I had to wait till my December birthday when I was 21. And went down. Somebody said to me, what did your mother say? I said, I didn't ask her. I mean, it wouldn't have occurred to me. And of course, I knew how to get to the Independence Hall where they were doing the enlisting. So, I mean, it was sort of without question.
You just
As I
enlisted.
say, my younger
That
brother
was
was
it.
already in, and he had gone into the Army Air Force, became a bombardier, and was sent to, I don't know how many places they sent you to. I know he was in Louisiana at one time, and someplace up in Maine another time. And that first year he was, I don't know, I guess they sent, I don't know why they sent him to all these different places. But then I enlisted at December of '42.
And what was your training like? What was your training like?
Well, when the WACs with 2 A's were formed, I can tell you when I went from Philadelphia on the 29th of December to Daytona Beach, Florida. The first place they sent it was called Tent City. We were living in tents. And for some of the women, they were crying. They wanted to go home because it was dirt floors. We were eating, and even on the train going down, and I knew nobody. Everybody was from the East Coast. The food, they couldn't stand the food. And I'm thinking it looks like a vacation. I mean, who had a vacation? But we were in this tent city for probably a week, living like we were in a camp. And then they put us up in Daytona Beach in hotels that had been emptied because they didn't have customers coming down there for the season. Again, you know, taking them over, and there were lots of beds and cots in different rooms. And we had about 6 weeks of training, but they didn't have uniforms, and they had told us to not come with too much baggage because it would have to be sent back. And it was warm down there. You had to send your winter coat back and whatever. But I spent the whole 30 months until we got uniforms assigned to us.
It was 30 months?
No, the 30 days, the first month,
Oh.
after the tent city experience. In the same dress, it was a yellow dress with Kelly green trim, and I had high-heeled Kelly green shoes, and marching on the Daytona Beach sands with high heels that would go into the sand. I mean, it was like a cartoon. Looking back,
Yeah.
at the time it was serious business because they were teaching us to obey orders, you know.
Uh-huh. So did you have any specialized training at all?
No, as I said, they really weren't ready for us. They finally got us a gear or whatever, uniforms. But when they issued all these clothes, it was heavy coats. Now we're in January. Heavy coats, woolen hats, woolen gloves, heavy shoes, woolen socks, and all olive drab, meaning that's winter stuff. And of course it was secret. Everything was secret. Nobody told anybody anything. And we weren't all together, so obviously we were going to be separated. We didn't know each other. But we got on this train in Daytona Beach, Florida. And of course you start whispering to everybody else, we must be going to Alaska. I mean, we were at war now. Where the heck else could we go that we needed all this stuff that city slickers didn't ever wear? And if you didn't know geography, because I'd look out the window, the train would rattle on, not very fast. Had no food on the train. We'd have to stop at some southern city, get off the train, go to some restaurant where they put us up. And I can tell you, everybody's looking, what is this red-eye gravy? And what are these hominy grits? And tears. I want to go home. I mean, why did I ever come here? And the rest of us sitting there. But, so on the train, and as I say, it took 4 days to go from Daytona Beach to Oklahoma, which anybody else was going to be making in 18 hours. The fourth day we got there, and on the train we were interviewed, but you had no idea what you were interviewed for. We had no specialized training. The stuff we had was learning Army discipline, the Articles of War, everybody's rank and how you address them, and that kind of stuff. So I'd look out the window, but I recognized some of it from geography. I recognized
Really?
Atlanta, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and then up to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And we arrived there about 9 o'clock. We were the first women there, and we were shown to whatever our barracks were going to be. And we had hot cocoa and cookies served by some soldiers. And we're told, go up and find, here's your mattress, here's your sheets, take your stuff, hang it up, and tomorrow morning on the bulletin board will be your assignment. So we go downstairs, and on the assignment it said I was a cook. I had not been trained by the Army. And usually you cannot touch their food if you haven't been trained in their way of hacking it up. So, but you can't complain, because I'm a cook. I guess, okay, I'll go and be a cook. I was 21 years old. I had worked at a little restaurant, and I found out later that in an interview, I had told the WAC officer that if I'd gone to college, I was going to be a home economics major. And so, okay.
So they put you together with that.
Yeah, so that was, and that I did. I did because if they issued the food and it said this is what to cook, and I was brought up as vegetarian, and you'd get these big, whatever they were. It was another cook on the other shift, and she was from Alabama. So if I had string beans, they were still green when we served them. On her shift, they were gray-green, because she said, put them on in the morning with a piece of ham, and they cooked them all day for the next meal. I mean, it was, so we...
Can see why you were crying.
Well, I wasn't crying. Hey, you do what you're told. I mean, I did that for my mother, whatever she told me to do. So, but then there was, a few months later, the Army decided they had too many women. They were just leaving. They'd just take a bus and go home.
Oh.
And it wasn't worth going after them because they were unhappy. So they were all AWOL, but they're not worth chasing. That's what I figured out afterwards. And so whoever came up and said, about me, they said, you can't have the person with, they gave you a test. We took tests up the gazoo. And I guess I scored very well in tests. They said, no, you can't have her cooking. But while I was doing the cooking, I was making up stuff. I mean, I worked in this little tea room. I knew about avocados, and I knew about tomatoes with chicken salad in the middle, and I could serve all this good stuff.
They didn't want to lose you.
Well, no, the Army, the major, whatever his name was, who came through on inspection about how we were doing with our cooking, because we had a separate mess hall, and there's a walk-in refrigerator, and he's looking around his stuff, and he said, he goes in, and I had decided we had stewed tomatoes almost every day, and I threw them out because nobody would eat them. So I thought, and I came from a family, you didn't waste food. I thought, I can make tomato aspic salad. That's what they served in the tea room. So I was, chopping pickles and celery. and he goes into this walk-in refrigerator, and I have it in a big cookie sheet. I was going to cut it in squares and put an olive and, parsley on the top. So he says, soldier, what is this? And I said, oh, that's going to be tomato aspic salad. I said, because they don't like this stewed tomatoes, and I don't want to waste food, and so it's hot outside. It was hot in Oklahoma. And they served the heavy meal at noon, and then you had to go back to work. So I said, I thought I'd make something light. And he just walked out, shaking his head. I expected to be sent to jail. So anyway, I had to be switched to something else.
So
I hated typing. But I had to work in an office where I got into all the other stuff I did, which was paperwork.
Right.
Paperwork.
Did you meet up with any Jewish discrimination when you were in Oklahoma, or
No, you
at
know,
any time?
I have to tell you, see, my upbringing was, I knew I was Jewish, but there was nothing, we didn't go to religious things. There was nothing else of a Jewish community where we were.
I see.
And because everybody was Italian, everybody I knew was Italian. And since we didn't observe as Jews, I did have the rabbi at Fort Sill come to call on me. But there was not anything that I responded to. But I'm trying to think, did we have Jewish people? Oh yes, my first sergeant was Jewish, Ray Mendel, right. No, I didn't see any discrimination, but, and we
so-
have a couple other girls, I'm now that you're asking.
So did you participate at all in the Jewish community
No,
life?
no,
Nothing.
no, never
Yeah.
did.
So how did you adapt to military life? It sounded like you adapted very well.
Well, I adapted because I think that's the way
Yeah.
it was at that time. But there was nobody that was going to say,
Yeah,
I'm not
so-
going to do this. It was just.
Is the physical...
It's hard to explain it now because we don't see that now.
Yeah. So you sort of covered the physical regime, that it was not the...
Yeah, I probably haven't thought about it that much, but yeah, I know if I ran out of things to do, my mother would do me a favor and let me scrub. You know, in Philadelphia and Baltimore and those cities, they have the steps are marble. So she said, okay, if you're a good girl, I'll give you the bucket of water and then you could
do
brush.
that.
And you could spend hours brushing this marble steps. So it
When
was,
you were in Oklahoma, did you have a barracks life, or were you also in a hotel the way you were in Florida?
No, the barracks life, you settle down because everybody had a job. In fact, one of the times they always put me in the motor corps, but I never had learned to drive. But in my tests, my father, I knew different kinds of saws, and I knew pliers from wrenches and all that stuff. And the gears, if this gear goes this way, this gear, you know, how does this gear go? So, but I couldn't drive. But a lot of the gals were sent to the motor corps if they drove, because then you drove the generals around. They didn't have to, anything they can use a female and let the soldiers go, because Fort Sill was a fort where they sent people overseas from there.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So I can remember, I remember a lot of that stuff.
So you told us about the food, but tell us about the social life.
Well, the social life, you know, because the ratio of men to women, and you didn't go, I don't think if we ever, it was an unusual thing if we went off the post, it was mostly having dances someplace, and the guys would always do that. And we always got invited to everything that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of that. There was a PX that you could walk to. And the wise guys in this service, if they called on you or something, to go for a walk in Fort Sill, where Geronimo, they always wanted to take you through the woods where Geronimo would jump from one cliff to the other or something like that. And otherwise, you really were taught to walk in the middle of the road where the lights are shining.
Uh-huh.
And you could go to the PX, or you could there were movies on the post. You know, when you talked about discrimination, and now this was early '43, for a couple months before we became part of the real army, we could go into town and we could wear our civilian clothes, the wax. This was still 43. So sometimes a couple of us would go into Lawton, Oklahoma. I don't think we went to the movies. We wouldn't have wasted our money, but looked around at the stores and maybe went in to eat at a restaurant or something different. The signs in the restaurants in Oklahoma, Lawton, Oklahoma, said, "No soldiers, no dogs." If we were still wearing civilian clothes, we would have gotten in. We saw that. We didn't think soldiers, but they didn't want the rough houses from Fort Sill to come in. They didn't sell liquor there. It was a dry state, but people carried liquor, and then they sold setups. ginger ale or soda or whatever. But by August of '43, we were in the Army. Now we had to wear our uniforms. Now to go downtown, and it now says no soldiers, no dogs. I don't know how
Did
long
they
that
change it?
lasted. I don't know how long because I think most of it just, I don't know, because by the time you worked all day and went to meals, you know, when it was time to go, you didn't tell your mother you're going to come later. But then you had to wash your own clothes on a rub board, hang them up, hope that they dried so you could iron a clean shirt for the next
Right.
day, write letters because there was nobody was really calling home. So that the social life was really just a few people around you. You didn't
Right.
have time for
Getting through the
you had
day.
to have, you had to have hair that didn't touch the collar. So most people were curling their hair because all the things then were
Uh-huh.
things we had to do. And
Right.
then the lights were out at 10 o'clock, so and you had to check in at bedtime. Nobody could stay away late. You're up at 5:30 to answer roll call and clean the toilets and
Yeah.
scrub the showers down or whatever. You all
So
had
that took up your day.
you had to do your thing before you went
Right.
to work. So no, it was pretty much dictated.
Did you
by the
stay
things
in
you had
this
to-
country the whole time? Did you go overseas at all?
And I joined the WACS because they would let you go overseas, but the office I was assigned to, we decided, we processed the people that went overseas, and WACS did go overseas. But the officer that was in charge of that office, because every time I saw a notice of something that we could send somebody, I'd say, I want to go there. He said, as long as I'm here, you're not going anyplace. Because I
You
guess
were
he
too
was-
valuable.
which I didn't catch on to right away. So I processed people that went overseas, and I had friends that and communicated with them who were with MacArthur, and one group we sent to with Eisenhower's headquarters in France.
These were women you're talking
These
about.
were women. These were women. In this office that we worked in, I had a women's company to do product, but there were about 8 other guys, and they each had it was what's called a service union. Guys that wore glasses, they couldn't go to the front,
Mhm.
did the paperwork. So we had, and one of the guys was Japanese. His parents were in a camp in Montana, I think. It was kind of sad, but you know the one thing I can tell you about being Jewish. Now it was a big office and everybody had a desk with their own files and cabinets and stuff, and there was a chief clerk in charge of us, and then the officer who signed everything. I don't think he had a third-grade education, but he must have been in the Army from whenever, and and the Okies from Texas were there. Somehow we're working, all of a sudden I'm hearing them say something about Hitler, you know, yeah, but you have to say this, he got rid of the Jews. And I remember
The
just putting
officer
my
said
hand
that.
up. Yeah, I think, I know who the guy was, because he had one full side, Archie, who was a real, Okie, I don't know what else to tell you. But I put my hand up and I said, well, here's one he didn't get. That room felt so quiet, and everybody was looking for stuff on their floor and pulling out the bottom drawers. But I thought about Jimmy, the Japanese guy, because what was said about the Japs, and
Right.
he's sitting there
Right.
knowing his parents are in a camp surrounded by snakes or something. So that took care of that, and there was never anything else
Well,
said.
that's a telling story. That's
Well,
a
it
very
was,
telling
yeah.
story.
And actually, I after the war, I married one of the guys I worked with, who was from
Oh.
Texas.
Okay.
So,
Well, what was my next question, about the friendships that you formed when you were in the service. And was there a feeling of camaraderie with many of them?
well, we had, there were a few that you'd gotten to. If somebody liked to drink beer, if they could get to place, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. I mean, my things were pretty. So yeah, I had a couple of very good friends there. One gal was from from Wisconsin. Her last name was Reckentaler, and we used to call her the Wreck. I always called her Wreck. But there were several. We had one woman there who was I don't know, I think a Christian Scientist or something. She was 50 years old when she came into the service. She had 2 boys, and one was killed. And one was always in trouble. One was Mr. Bright. Well, Mr. Bright was killed. But she, after we left, she wrote us a newsletter until she died at almost 100. Called the Barracks Bag. I was looking for a copy of it, but I couldn't get my hand on it.
Well, that was one of my questions, was did you stay in touch? Obviously, you were able to do that with her.
Stacia Merrill,
Yeah.
I remember her name.
But it was unusual for somebody to be 50, wasn't it?
I don't remember whether there was a top number. I really don't. She was a great, I forget what she was in the motor pool. She drove a truck.
Well, you mentioned that you would stay in touch with your family by writing letters. Is that the only way you could stay in touch?
Well, the picture that I have there of the brother that was went into service, he was killed a year and a week before D-Day. They were bombing from England. That picture was taken when I got to Fort Sill. He was sent to someplace in Kansas on the way to overseas. So he went over in 43, but he did it. In fact, my mother told me that he had said he had almost 50 missions and would get to come home after 50 missions. They must have gone over every other night or something to bomb. They were trying to, from England, they were trying to, the 8th Air Force, they were trying to bomb the munitions business in Germany. Bombed them. And he was killed on a raid. They brought him back to England. He's buried in England. But yeah, then I got a phone call. I guess whoever came to the family arranged a phone call to my company, and I got called. And because I asked my mother if I should come home, and she said, "What? So we'll just both sit around crying?" So she went back to work, and I just waited a couple months and went back.
Where were you at the war's end? Where were you when the war ended?
Well, I brought that certificate from that adjutant general's school at Camp Lee, because that was in 45. But they had started to send people to that school to get ready for the separation centers which they set up. And by that time, I'd probably become really very conversant with Army paperwork. And I had been selected to go there. And the picture with my brother, I got I think a 2-day pass. I don't remember spending in the hotel to go see him in Kansas, but he was about to take off. So I got to see him. Somebody took these pictures while I don't know what we did. It must have gone to eat something. And I had to get back on the bus and get back. But while I was at that school, the war, you can see the date of the certificate is May 45, May 5th, and by the 8th, the war was declared over there, but you sort of knew it was on its way. And when that was a crazy experience, was they were mostly all men in this class and very few women, and everybody came from someplace else. So it was a 6-week course, 6 or 7 week course, and every Friday that we had a test, and every Monday the results were posted, and if you didn't make it, you were sent back to where you came from. So you had to keep up with this. And I remember the first week, it was a Monday, and we were invited to a dance, and I went to this dance, and nobody asked me to dance. It was like I had Ebola or something. And finally, one older soldier came over and said, "Are you?" and asked me my name, and I said, "Yes." And he said, well, you know, you got the highest mark in the class. And all the guys knew this, but it hadn't been put up in our barracks. So they were like,
They were afraid of you.
yeah, it was, and I thought, holy smoke. So then the guys started, he told me this in his barracks, that they had one guy in their barracks, he said, I'm gonna be graduated at the top of this class. So they bet on whether I beat him each week of the next 5 weeks. So, and when we graduated, and we're marching down, I was allowed to carry the flag because I star pupil. And the general or whoever who gave the commencement address, he looks over at the guys, he said, how'd you let this little girl beat you all? So that doesn't
So
make
you were the winner.
winner.
You were the winner. How long were you in, I mean, when did you leave the service and go home?
It was 3 years, just almost 3 years to the date, almost, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, it's,
And what was it like going home? What kind of a reception did you
well,
get?
you know what? It's, because so many people didn't come back, their lives changed after the war. My oldest brother by that time, who had worked in a hospital the whole time, he was drafted to go, and they sent him to a hospital in Italy. So he was in the Army and I came home. So it was just my mother and I by that
I
time.
see.
And I had to find a job. And in fact, actually, I went to work for the Veterans Administration in Philadelphia.
So it was difficult to readjust to civilian life, or?
You know, I think you just took it in stride. I mean, because there were so many things that had changed. I mean, there were really a lot of people killed, obviously. Once you graduate from high school, you're in the war, scattered people. So we came back, it was not almost the same community anymore.
Yeah.
And my mother lived in a little apartment, actually then by herself.
Your father
She
had
went
died
to-
at that point.
There was separation of this family.
I see.
I'm not going to go into too much about family. He ended up in
I
California.
see.
I think he wanted to write a book or something, whatever. But
Okay,
Yeah.
so you sort of described how the war affected your life, but,
it was a life changer. There's absolutely no question about it. No question about it. And certainly the age we were at that time.
so you mentioned you married someone who was in your
Yeah,
unit.
and I was working, after I went to work at the Veterans Administration, I had corresponded with him and you kept up a lot of correspondence. All of us were writing letters every night. Everybody knew whatever we did. And when he came back, he invited me to come out to Texas to meet his family. His sister had been in the Red Cross and worked in Europe. She had been a Miss Texas one year in some beauty contest. And I think, if I look at the marriage, it was probably a mistake like a lot of us made after the service. It was sort of a settling down, and you didn't know other people. I mean, I look at it that way. It was not a successful venture. I mean, I was not fit. I mean, Texas was crazy. It was Yankee, and Texas was not viable.
Okay. So, have you kept in touch with any of the people that you were in service with?
I think the ones that I did are dead, or aren't very. I don't think the last one I wrote to, that it just came back, either moved or not here or something. Although I did in Stanford at the YWCA one day, so I went back to something at the Y. The mature woman returns to the labor market, or whatever they were talking about, and somebody walked by, and I did like this, and I said, "Aren't you Lucille Noonan?" Novak, her name was Novak, and she looked down at me, but she was an officer with the company, and she married somebody and lived up on Rolling Ridge or something on the ridges. They were both officers. So I got to know her a little bit. And she and I went down to whack veterans things as they were establishing the memorial down there. And I think she died because she was living in Connecticut and went out to live close to a daughter of hers. And then I tried phoning and I didn't get, so I think she had passed away.
Pobie, reflect on some of the life lessons that you might have gotten from the military. Were there any?
Well, you certainly had to learn to get along with people because you were constantly with people not of your own choice. And I think you learned that people have to work together and nothing gets done. And you certainly made judgments about people, good and bad, or who you liked based on the way they conducted themselves, because nobody could show off with good clothes or new shoes. I mean, everything was so regimented
Right.
that it was a great leveler, which was okay with me.
So is there anything else you want to share that was unique, noteworthy about your experiences that we haven't covered? I'm sure there are.
I think the thing that, if I had just picked one out that was maybe a little bit different, is that if I was told you cannot do this, because every month we have the articles of war read to us, so we understood, what to do if caught as a prisoner and all that stuff, and obligations about who you address, your superiors and all that stuff, which was okay. But if they didn't tell me I couldn't do it, and I thought it was something that should be done, I was not afraid to do it, which that may have upset some of them, like the aspic salad business. And I did something, but at that time I said, why do we have breakfast on Sunday at 6:30? Everybody wants to sleep and then they go to church. And so the WAC officers, for the length of time we had our own, I said, okay, good idea. So I said, I'll cook the time I'm on Sunday, I'll cook to order. They can have, not scrambled eggs, they can have an egg over or whatever. So then all their boyfriends started to come and have breakfast at the WAC kitchen because they could eat at 11
I can see
o'clock.
why they would.
Yeah, sure. And then instead of a supper, Sunday night supper was always cold cuts. So I said, well, instead of having everybody come here, we'll put them in the day room where the guys could come and sit and chat and whatever. And from my experience with the tea room, set up a nice buffet table. And then when the guys were coming back from and being discharged, I told you they looked like Joe and Willie. And I mean, some of them, if the paperwork wasn't right, and some of them had come back because their unit had probably been underwater, and you got a piece of paper and just say, this is your record, write the discharge from this. And first we prepared a written discharge and then sent it to a place for typing. I think it was before electric typewriters, I'm not sure. Yeah, sure. So, and it's a multiple form with a hard copy as the discharge. So, you knew you didn't want to screw up and not get those guys there in 48 hours from the time they got off the train, dropped their stuff, went to the medics, got a physical, blah, blah, came around, and we were processing papers. Everything had to be ready for them to be discharged and they could go home. So if you lost a piece of paper, and the guy's paperwork didn't come out, I mean, they'd sit there and cry until we could find the paperwork. So, because I was in charge of the section to prepare them, and you had people that they hired civilians in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And, some of them didn't have much of an education and were sitting there. So when there was a lapse in the load of paperwork, you pass it on. I had decided to march these employees into the next room, which was a meeting, receiving room, and they had a chalkboard and stuff. And I was trying to teach them the abbreviations. If you saw this, it means this. If the company was here on certain dates, you gave them every honor that unit had.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't see it in writing, you just knew he was there to go in, and he's still with the company. And so I was taking them in there to teach them so we didn't have errors. And some colonel or some comes through, and there was a WAC officer with him, and he said, who told her to do that? And she said she decided it was you know, and I
Another
explained what it
instance,
was.
right.
I was using the time. So, I didn't get fired for that either. But,
I'm sure a lot of people thank you for that.
well, but what they did, and then the next thing was, the gals that was my friend for the rec was a good typist. They would pass the prepared typed discharge up to this 90-day wonder that the Army didn't need anymore. All he had to do was sign his name. And he had come over to me and looked at it, and he said, "Sergeant, where did it say that this guy was in all these battles?" And I said, "Well, that's the rule, that's sir." And he just was arguing that I was doing it wrong. So the whistle goes off, it's time to go to mess, 12 o'clock, everything stops. So they left, and he was about to, he said, "I could have you court-martialed," because I explained why I did it and told him what I was told to do. So while we were at that noontime, I raced over to the officer that I know that I reported to. I said to him, if one person said this and one person said that, who was right? So he said, "Well, you know, that's it," because we had a map and told you all this stuff. And I said, "Well, Lieutenant so-and-so is threatening to." So he said, "Don't go back, and let me go." When I finally came back from lunch, this officer who was going to threaten me, he said, "I didn't know you were a graduate of Columbia University." I said, "Who told you that?" Anyway, but I didn't, it was okay. But then they sent a whack officer who was getting to be excess, who sat there next to me at a little desk, and she just sat and read papers. I don't know what the heck she did to protect me, so that the equal rank could talk to him.
I see.
That's a lesson. I know that's a funny lesson.
Well, Pobie, before we go,
Yeah.
you have these photographs, and I wonder if you'd hold them up and tell us what they're about.
Well, this one was this was the school that I went to, and as I say, ended up at the top of the class and beat these guys that were waiting to just watch me fall, I guess. Which was, of course, was very nice. And then we got to, can I move it? But this was a picture taken, as I say, with my younger brother just before he went over to England. And they hadn't seen wax at whatever this Kansas spot was. And this was just something, I don't know, probably the post photographer may have sent me this one, but it was just an idea of what we used to get invited to. Everybody danced to jitterbug numbers. So I keep some of that
How
on
about
my...
this wonderful portrait?
And this was actually after, this was probably about the time we were no longer wax with 2 A's and became the Women's Army Corps. And there was a photographer shop, you could go and get the picture taken. And then I think after that we didn't wear these Charles de Gaulle hats.
Oh,
We got the regular hats.
the tan. And I see he must have been a sergeant.
I was a sergeant, yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, Pobie, thank you so much. This was an absolutely wonderful interview, and it was really a pleasure and a treat to hear your
Well,
stories.
it was fun to be asked to do it, because it's, I mean, it even made me think of things that I had done at different places, and whatever my attitude was about always following the law. I mean, and I think to this day, that's like the first thing that I look to see. And I watch all the public servants, you know, to see.
Mhm.
That's what I stopped and asked Frank about, because we were on a couple of charter revisions, Frank Melser, and the thing that's been in the paper recently about some of the obligations of the cities, financial obligations of the city about Mill River Park and the TIFs and all that stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, who the hell's watching this store? Where's Norman Gluss when I need him?
Oh.
Where's a couple of guys that I
I
could
know,
go to?
I know.
Yeah, I knew
But-
that I wouldn't think I was crazy, because I don't know whether they're knowing what they're doing with those, the financial obligations of the city, I think are mounting. I was trying to add them up today, just to, so, but that part, but the business about being innovative and trying to do things that make sense.
Well, I know from following your public life that that has been part of your life, well, as long as I have known you.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's right, but I
Yeah.
don't know that I've thought about it that way.
Yeah.
It's,
Because as you were speaking of your experiences and doing things that made sense,
yeah,
it's, you know, I think of you in all of your public life, that was part of it.
yeah, it's but I don't know, I kind of think that I got that from my mother, from parents. I mean, the way and even the business of not being, I never would have never asked them why we were not part of the Jewish community, but as I say, from as far as I can remember, it was, I mean, I knew where the Jewish bakery was, and I knew where the Italian bakery were. Both of them I could walk to if my mother told me to run and get something for
Mhm.
10 cents or whatever. But it wasn't like kids nowadays that go any place. I mean, we didn't walk too far. You'd almost have to see us.
Yeah,
If we played hide and seek, it was like, you know, where is everybody? Anyway,